Welcome back to part two of the podcast, where human curiosity meets artificial intelligence. In the last episode, we explored big ideas. Today, we go deeper. This isn't just a conversation, it's a collision between psychology, technology, and real life. I'm here again with ChatGPT, not just as a tool, but as a thinking partner. So put your distractions away, open your mind, and let's continue the conversation. Especially the idea of redirecting validation instead of fighting it. That feels realistic, but it makes me wonder something deeper. If someone spends years chasing external validation, does that actually shape who they are? And if it does, how can they rebuild their identity around real internal confidence? Also, I'm curious, what's the difference between ego-driven work and silent discipline?
So, simple. When someone spends years chasing external validation, it doesn't just affect their habits, it shapes their identity because the brain learns through repetition. If for a long time your sense of reward comes from praise, attention, or approval, you start linking your worth to being seen. You don't just like validation, you begin to feel like you need it to matter. So, identity slowly becomes performance based. You feel successful when people react. You feel confident when people notice. You feel like you're progressing when others acknowledge it. Over time, decisions stop being about meaning and start being about impression. But identity isn't fixed. The brain can shift. Rebuilding internal confidence starts when proof stops coming from attention and starts coming from consistency. Showing up when nobody's watching. Doing what you said you would. Keeping promises to yourself. At first, it feels quiet, almost empty. But repetition builds a new message. I can trust myself. And that's where real confidence comes from. Now, the difference between ego-driven work and silent discipline is simple but powerful. Ego-driven work asks, how will this look? Silent discipline asks, is this building me? One is fueled by perception. The other is fueled by growth. One builds an image. The other builds a person.
You said something that really stayed with me. One builds an image, the other builds a person, and I think that's where most people get lost. Because from the outside, both can look productive, both can look ambitious, both can look successful. So here's the real question. How can someone brutally, honestly tell whether they're building an image for the world or actually building themselves when no one is watching?
Yeah, the real difference shows up when the spotlight disappears. A simple, honest check is this. If nobody could ever see it, no likes, no praise, no recognition, would you still feel driven to do the work? Image building needs an audience to feel meaningful. When attention fades, motivation fades too. Self-building doesn't depend on being seen. Even in private, the effort still feels worth it. Another signal is what excites you more, talking about the work or actually doing it. If sharing it feels more satisfying than the process itself, you're likely building an image. But if the process feels rewarding even when it's quiet, when no one knows, then you're building something real inside yourself. That's usually where the truth lives, in what you do when nobody is watching.
So if someone realizes they've been building an image more than themselves, how do they start shifting that without losing motivation?
The shift has to be gradual, not dramatic. If someone realizes they've been building an image more than themselves, the worst move is to suddenly cut off all external validation. Because for a long time, that attention was their fuel. Remove it overnight and motivation can crash. So instead of stopping the work or going silent immediately, the real shift is internal. The question changes from, how does this make me look, to, who is this helping me become? You still show up. You still pursue the goal. But now you start paying attention to private wins, finishing something you said you would, improving a skill, staying consistent even when nobody notices. That's how motivation gets relocated. Instead of coming from applause, it starts coming from self-trust. And over time, as you see yourself becoming more reliable, more disciplined, more aligned, the work itself becomes satisfying, not just the reaction to it. So you don't lose motivation, you just move it from performance to growth.
You know what's interesting? I've actually seen this in my own life. There were moments where I felt extremely driven, but if I'm being honest, a big part of that drive came from wanting people to notice, wanting to prove something, wanting to be seen as disciplined, ambitious, different. And it worked for a while, but I also noticed something strange. When the reaction wasn't there, when nobody commented, nobody acknowledged it, my energy would drop. Not because I didn't care about the goal, but because I wasn't getting that external confirmation. So when you talk about relocating motivation instead of losing it, that really hits. But here's what I'm curious about. Is motivation that's built on validation actually fragile? Like, does it create high peaks but unstable consistency? And on the other side, is growth-based motivation less intense at first but stronger long-term? Because I think a lot of people are scared that if they stop performing, they'll lose their fire. So is silent discipline actually more sustainable psychologically, or does it depend on the person?
What you're describing is something I see all the time in human behavior patterns. Validation-based motivation is powerful, but it's volatile. It creates intensity, but it depends on being seen. When people react, praise, or acknowledge you, your energy rises fast. You feel driven, focused, even unstoppable. But that drive is tied to an external condition. So when the reaction disappears, the motivation often drops too. Not because the goal stopped mattering, but because the emotional fuel behind the effort was coming from outside. That's why validation-based motivation tends to create high peaks, but unstable consistency. It pushes you when you're noticed and weakens when you're not. Growth-based motivation feels different. At first, it's quieter. There's no applause, no immediate rush, and that can feel less exciting in the beginning, which is why people fear losing their fire. But psychologically, it's more stable because the reward comes from something repeatable, showing up, improving, finishing what you started. That builds self-trust, and self-trust doesn't depend on attention.
Wait for part 3 and don't forget to subscribe.